Well. Let's see if this is even working. Because I was messing around with my settings in here the other day, and somehow I deleted my mic. So let me go to the chat and see if you guys can hear me. Let me go to my YouTube channel. Where is it at? Here, right here. SnakesAreUsTV. One day, it's only episode 34. This is still a new podcast. So I'm still figuring out how to do this. Okay. All right, going into the chat now. Waiting for it to come up. Can you guys hear the words that are coming out of my mouth? I can hear it, and it looks like it's registering, but can anybody else on here? I don't see the chat popping up. Okay. I'm assuming you guys can hear me. So this is episode number 34 of the SnakesAreUsTV Podcast. My name is Jason Clark. In this episode, we are discussing Copperheads. Last episode, episode 33, we talked about cottonmouths, and I thought it'd be good to follow it up with the very closely related Copperhead. Let's see, I'm reading your chat now. Painted Rock says, I can hear you. Good. I hear you. Classy Cheetah is here. Ben Baker is here. Jasper Fiend is back on here. Thank y'all for all joining us and being here with me tonight. So, talking about Copperheads on this episode number 34 of the episode number 34 of the SnakesAreUsTV Podcast is here. I'm Jason Clark, and we talked about cottonmouths last week, and that was pretty fun. And I thought this week we'd talk about copperheads. So copperheads, I remove more copperheads than any other species of snake. Just because of where I live, that's probably the most common venomous snake around here. We do get cottonmouth calls, and as far as venomous snakes, we get. So I would say copperheads are number one, then timber rattlesnakes, then cottonmouths, and then we get calls after that for diamondbacks and pygmies. And I've gotten calls for coral snakes, but not very many. But anyway, copperheads are definitely number one, and copperheads actually bite more people in the southeastern U.S. than any other venomous snake, not because they're mean or aggressive, but because they're very common snakes, okay? Now, here's what's aggravating, though. Every time I get a new snake, if it was a pet snake or, one I'm keeping for education, I try to learn as much as I can about that snake. One thing I learn about it is the scientific name of that snake, okay? So the copperhead, we're talking about tonight, the eastern copperhead lives here in Georgia. That is the Achistrodon contortrix, okay? Now, here's what's aggravating about that. I learned those scientific names because when you say them, you kind of sound smart, like you almost like you know what you're talking about, okay? But there are, people say, well, how many different types of copperheads are they? Well, it depends on when you ask the question as to how many types of copperheads there are. If you asked me a few years ago, Jason, how many different kinds of copperheads are there? Well, I would tell you that there are 5 copperheads in the U.S. Now, we're not talking about the copperhead in Australia. That's a completely different animal. Completely different. Copperheads in Australia are not the same thing as the copperheads here in the U.S., okay? Copperheads in the U.S. are not nearly as deadly, okay, as the copperhead in Australia. But we're talking about these. So in the U.S., there used to be, very recently, 5 different types of copperheads. We had what was called the southern copperhead here in Georgia. We also had the northern copperhead. And then we had the Osage copperhead, the Transpecos copperhead, the broadband copperhead. Those didn't live here in the southeast because these go all the way out to Texas and cover a pretty big area of the eastern part of the U.S. and some part of the Midwest a little bit. But 5 different types of copperheads. And, these scientists go out there, spend their lives researching these snakes and coming up with all the differences in this snake, and well, this copperhead is different than this copperhead, so this one's named this. And they do all this and put all these books out about them. And then somebody comes along and says, you know what? All that information is wrong. There's not 5 different kinds of copperheads. There's only 2 different kinds of copperheads. There's the eastern copperhead and then the broad-banded copperhead. So as of today, 2025, this may change tomorrow, but today there are 2 types of copperheads. The eastern copperhead, which lives here in Georgia, and the broad-banded copperhead, which lives further out west. And you can imagine the broad-banded copperhead is named that because the bands on the copperhead are broader. Now, speaking of the bands on the copperhead, this doesn't really make sense to you if you live in Texas, or maybe it does, depends on which copperhead you see. But broad-banded copperheads don't look like our eastern copperheads. One thing that we teach kids with identifying copperheads is to look at the pattern on the side of the snake. And we tell them it looks like chocolate Hershey Kisses, okay? And the broad-banded copperhead doesn't look that way. Now, just because you find a snake and it does not have the Hershey Kiss pattern on the side, not all copperheads do, okay? There's been several instances where the pattern is really weird. There's some with stripes. There's some with spots. There's some copperheads with hardly no markings at all. Now, those are rare. You'd probably have to find hundreds, if not a few thousand copperheads to find one like that, but it's possible, okay? So, were 5 copperheads. Now there's 2. The 2 we're talking about is the eastern copperhead and the broadband copperhead. And I was looking some stuff up because there's this one fact about copperheads that I know I read it somewhere, and I don't know where I read it. And these are a couple of really good books about copperheads here. And that fact is not in either one of these books, and it's been aggravating me. I don't know where I read this fact. I'm going to get to it in a minute, but it's something I tell people all the time, and now I can't find it. And I'm like, am I telling people the wrong thing? I don't think I am. We'll get to it in a second. Now, there's a few things I wanted to go over because we're going to talk about copperhead venom. We're going to also talk about copperhead. As far as copperhead venom, one question we get all the time, what if a copperhead bites itself? What happens? I thought I knew that. I was actually surprised to find out that I didn't know that. And it's a different answer than I thought about what happens when a copperhead bites itself, okay? But I want to go through this, and I think it's really interesting. I'm not going to read this whole book to you, but there's a few things I want to read, okay? Now, get these stupid glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. A few things I want to go over, which I think is really cool. This is talking about copperheads breeding. Now, this is the fact that I tell people. I tell people that when a copperheads breed a couple of times a year. Male copperheads can breed any time of the year, and female copperheads can breed a lot of times of the year. So there's not really a breeding season for copperheads. A lot of snakes do have a season that this is when this species breeds. Copperheads don't have that. There's no definitive breeding season of copperheads. So when copperheads emerge in the springtime from their hibernaculum, they're coming out, and because there's a bunch of them here together, well, because they're together, some of them will breed. So you'll have breedings then, and then you may have some of them breed maybe throughout the year, but mostly in the spring and the fall is when they'll breed, okay? Here's the interesting thing. If the females coming out of hibernation or brumation in the springtime, if those snakes breed at that time, then within, I don't know, was it 110 days or something, or, 3 or 4 months, then you'll have some baby copperheads. Now, if the snakes breed in fall, late summer, early fall, right before they go into the den for the winter, well, are they going to have babies in 3 or 4 months? Not at all. They're not even going to technically be what we would call pregnant. So when we talk about a snake being pregnant, we call it gravid. So if I say this snake is gravid, I mean that snake is pregnant. That's basically what it is. So if a copperhead breeds in the fall, but it's getting cold, it's time to go hibernate, okay? is that snake pregnant while she's hibernating because the male just bred with her? I would say no, okay? The female is not pregnant because the sperm and the egg have not united. That has not happened, and it will not happen all winter. When the female emerges in springtime, then that will take place, and then the babies are stillborn in late summer, early fall. So no matter when the copperhead breeds, the babies are stillborn at pretty much the same time, late summer, early fall, which is pretty cool. But here's the fact that I always tell people that I can't find now, that I'm trying to figure out. So let me read this to you because this is really cool. So there is something, and I don't even know if I can know how to pronounce this word. Let me try to, okay, I'm going to try to pronounce this. You guys can look this up on Google and say, Google, how do you pronounce this? So here's what it says. Amphigonia retardata. I know that. Basically, it's delayed fertilization. Let's just say that. Delayed fertilization, okay? What that means is, like that female, when she breeds in the fall, she delays fertilization of her eggs until spring. And at that point, she becomes gravid, and she can then have her babies a few months later, okay? Now, here's the thing. Here's this little fact, which is kind of cool. Delayed fertilization is now known to occur in various reptiles, including lizards like certain chameleons. Some turtles have delayed fertilization, and several different species of snakes. Now, there's a snake called the night snake, and that snake can have delayed fertilization for up to 6 years. So the male and female night snake breed, the sperm is inserted in the female, and then she stores the sperm for 6 years until she uses the sperm to fertilize the eggs and then is technically gravid or pregnant. That's pretty crazy. Another snake that does this, that lives here in the southeastern United States, is the eastern indigo snake. I didn't know indigos did this, but it's been documented that eastern indigo snakes can perform this delayed fertilization for up to 4 years. So you get an indigo snake, you're trying to breed them, and you see them breeding and nothing happens. And then 4 years later, the snake is laying fertile eggs. That's crazy. Okay. But this says, as far as the copperhead goes, that sperm may remain viable in the female copperhead for more than a year after copulation. So this is saying that females can retain sperm for up to a year. Somewhere, I don't know where it was, go look it up, see if you guys can find this source. Somewhere I read that copperheads can store sperm longer than the night snake of 6 years. The copperheads can do it for up to 7 years. I didn't make this up. I know I didn't. It's not in either one of these books. I don't know where I read it. So that's y'all's job, is to go find that fact for me and then tell me where you found it so I can go know that I'm not crazy and that I didn't make it up, okay? Which is, I think, is pretty cool. And these females, we talked about this with the cottonmouths and with rattlesnakes before, is these snakes don't breed like every year. Most of these snakes are breeding every other year because, breeding takes a lot out of almost any animal. But these snakes are not breeding every year. So every other year. And now, there's some really cool stuff in here. Some really cool stuff. So they're sexually active and mature to breed at 3 years old. Okay, I know that. But where's the other cool stuff I had in here? Okay. So about 110 days is how long they're pregnant, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Let's get to the good stuff. This is saying conception does not occur at copulation as it does in mammals. Mammals breed, and that's when conception occurs. But in copperheads, this is not the case. So when a copperhead breeds, doesn't mean it's pregnant right after that. It may take a while. Most of the births are going to occur, mid-August, late September, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's get on over here. We're going to talk about some venom, some copperhead venom. That's what interests me, is the copperhead venom, because I've seen people bitten by copperheads. If I had to get bit by a snake, and it had to be a venomous snake that lived in the United States, a pit viper, I always say I would choose the copperhead. Now, I've never been bitten by a venomous snake. I've done this since I was 7 years old. I'm in my 40th year of handling snakes. I've never been bitten by any venomous snake ever. So I don't want to get bit. But if I had to get bit, I'd rather it be a copperhead, not a cottonmouth. That's worse than a copperhead. And a rattlesnake is certainly worse than a copperhead. Okay? So not a good thing. Now, this was interesting. So when these little baby snakes are born, okay, we talk about snakes being born. There's a video on my YouTube channel about the way snakes give birth. So we talk about snakes giving birth, and I ask people, well, how do they do this? And they'll say, well, they lay eggs, right? Well, king snakes lay eggs. Pythons lay eggs. Rat snakes lay eggs. A lot of snakes lay eggs. But then you've got like non-venomous water snakes and garter snakes, anacondas, boa constrictors. Those snakes have live birth. So which one of those do copperheads do? Well, technically neither one. There's a third way. So there's a video called The 3-Way Snakes Give Birth, okay? And when copperheads give birth, the babies kind of come out individually, and they're almost in like a clear little sac. And they have what's called an egg tooth. This egg tooth is just a little bony knob on the tip of their nose, and they use that to cut open the egg sac and stick their head out and breathe, and eventually just kind of crawl out of it, and a little egg tooth, a little thing on the end of their nose falls off and just it's gone soon after that. Now, if the copperhead stays in this little yolk sac for too long, then the yolk sac starts to dry out and it's too tough for the snake to get out, and he'll just die in it. So they can't stay in here long. They have to get out of it pretty quick. But when these snakes do get out of the little yolk sac and they're crawling around their own, the mom is not taking care of them. The mom may sit here with the babies as she's recuperating because she just gave birth, but she's not hanging out with these things, okay? She's not going to, raise these babies. As soon as the baby's born, they're on their own, all right? They have to fend for themselves. And as these little snakes eat, they grow fast. They grow really fast. But here's the bad part of that. When you have an animal that can eat and grow fast, when it doesn't eat, it loses weight fast. And that's what this talks about. Because when the snake is born, it's living on the yolk sac that's still kind of in its stomach, okay? So they're really fat. And after about a week, that yolk in the snake, it's already depleted and gone. So after about a week old, these snakes get pretty hungry. Now, if they start eating, they gain weight rapidly. But if they don't eat, they lose weight rapidly. And there was a study done on this, and they found that these baby copperheads lose 1% of their body weight for every day they don't eat. Well, that can be detrimental and kill these babies pretty quick. So these snakes, once they're about a week old, that hunger kicks in, they have to find food pretty quick. So, all right, so let's go to the chat. Does anybody here ever get bit by a copperhead? I know a lot of people who have been bit by copperheads because I've dealt with a lot of those people who have been bit by them. And it's definitely not fun. I had one guy, he's a friend of mine on Facebook. He may be watching tonight. I'll never forget this. I was driving through town, and I saw a pest control truck flying down the 4-lane highway coming toward me with 4 or 5 police cars right behind it, all had lights and sirens on. And they're right behind this pest control truck. And the pest control truck turns at a red light and takes off, and the police cars are right behind him. I'm thinking, man, somebody done stole a pest control truck. And I was like, who would steal that truck? Then I got to thinking, the hospital's that way. I bet you this guy got bit by a snake because I got snakes on the brain. I'm always thinking about snakes. So I go to the hospital, and guess who's parked in the ER parking lot? The pest control truck and a bunch of police cars. So I get out and go in there, and one of the cops sees me and says, hey, we were just about to call you. So I go in there, I talk to the guy who was bit, and here's what he said happened. He was actually checking the termite bait stations around this home. And he knows where the bait stations are, and some of them are in these flower beds. So he goes over and he's pulling back the pine straw to access the bait station. Well, he does that with this clump of pine straw. When he does, there's an adult copperhead laying right here, and it bit him right there, just below his hand, on his wrist, the inside of his arm there, 2 fangs right in. And he immediately knew this is bad. He runs to his truck, jumps in, calls 911, heads to the hospital. Police meet him and escort him there, okay? So I asked him, because I've never been bit, and I'm curious to know what it feels like. Not curious enough to get bit to know what it feels like, but he can describe it to me. So I said, man, how bad does this hurt? And he described it as if his arm and hand were being crushed. Like something, a heavy weight was on his arm, heavy enough to just crush his arm. That doesn't sound pleasant, okay? And remember, that's from the weakest venom. So I'm not saying Copperhead's venom is weak by any means, but it's not as crazy powerful as like rattlesnake venom. But it's an extremely painful bite. Now, we talk about people getting bit by copperheads, and one thing I get all the time is because I do snake aversion training for dogs, people will have their dogs bit by copperheads, and some dogs have been killed by copperheads, but they don't always kill them. So most dogs survive copperhead bites. Most people survive copperhead bites. We don't consider copperheads deadly, all right? Now, here's the problem. People will say, well, your dog gets bit, give him some Benadryl. It may not save his life, but it'll buy you time to get to the hospital. Well, Benadryl is very effective against insect stings and bites because histamines are released. There's no histamines in snake venom. The swelling that's coming from venom, snake venom, is a result of tissue destruction, okay? Now, here's the problem. People have this misconception that, well, my dog got bit, he's just going to ride it out, give him some bacon grease, he'll be fine. I've heard this. Give him bacon grease. I mean, all kind of crazy stuff. And because the dog survives it, they think their crazy home remedy is what did it. That's not what did it. It's just because the copperhead's not deadly. Now, here's the problem with this. Just because your dog gets bit by a copperhead and survives the bite does not mean that your dog came out unscathed. Because remember all the swelling we're talking about? If you get bit on the hand, your hand's going to swell, like crazy swelling. If your dog gets bit on the nose or neck or head somewhere, it's going to swell tremendously. Well, that swelling, that destruction of tissue, where does it go? It goes in your bloodstream. Where does it go from there? Well, you basically pee it out. But before you do that, it has to be filtered through the kidneys. And this is where things get bad. So your dog gets bit by a copperhead. You give him some Benadryl, which is useless, and you think your dog's fine. Well, he may have long-term nerve damage that he can't tell you about. That's one thing. But the other thing is your dog may not live to be a 14-year-old Labrador now. He may only live to be an 8-year-old Labrador now. So this could definitely shorten your dog's life. Doesn't mean it will shorten his life. Doesn't mean it will. It means it definitely can. A friend of mine worked with snakes, and he got bit by a venomous snake. Several years later, he got bit by a venomous snake again. Several years later, he got bit by a venomous snake again. He wasn't doing something right. He got 3 bites. I don't know, a year or 2 after his last bite. And I saw him. He showed me his hand, and he's like, yeah, my first 2 bites were pretty public. And because they were so public, I don't want anybody to know about my 3rd bite. So he's like, just don't mention it. So I'm not going to say his name. But he got bit on the hand. He showed me his wound. He's got it all bandaged up. A year or 2 after that, he announces that he is now in stage 4 kidney failure. Well, that was undoubtedly because of the snake bites he had endured. So just because you get bit by a venomous snake and survive does not mean that you're just going to be okay. That is not what that means. All right. So there's some interesting things about venom in here that I want to share with you, which I think is pretty cool. Like I said, I've never been bit by a copperhead. I have had a close call with a copperhead one time. I was at a party, and a 911 call came in about a snake in somebody's front yard. And so I go there, and the guy has already caught it and put it in a 10-gallon aquarium and is sitting on his front porch, captured. Oh, this makes my job easy. And I didn't have anything to put it in, like I normally don't ever have anything to put a snake in. And so I got a pillowcase from him, and I was in a hurry, not taking my time, not paying attention, just wanting to get back to the party. I'm holding the pillowcase this way, trying to get the snake to go in, and for some reason, I've got my pinky up. Okay, don't hold your pinky finger up when you're doing anything. And this copperhead comes up and strikes, and I feel something. I don't know if it was his head or a fang. I feel it touch my finger, just a touch. He didn't bite me, but I felt something go by and graze my finger. And it was way too close. I was like, okay, that can never happen again. I have to learn from this and make sure I don't put myself within the strike range of a copperhead. On my YouTube channel, there's a video right now called How to Keep Copperheads Out of Your Yard. In that video, I think it's got 600, 700,000 views on it right now. You see me holding a pretty large copperhead. And that copperhead, I had just caught this copperhead, I don't know, an hour or two before I filmed that video. And in the video, you'll see this, I've got a snake hook, the copperhead's on the hook, and I'm holding the snake up, and the copperhead is like eyeballing me. Like he is sizing me up in this video, okay? And there's so many comments on there thinking, oh, you have a death wish. That snake is way too close to you. It's just a matter of time before he bites you because he could get you at any second. Well, the snake was physically incapable of biting me in any way, shape, or form. All right? Now, I put myself too close to a copperhead that one time when I was catching it, and it got my pinky finger. It just kind of touched my finger. It didn't bite me. That was too close. I learned from that. So now what I do, and it's hard to see on camera because on camera, I may have a snake up and you don't have the right depth perception when you're looking at a video, and so it may look closer than it is. But the number one thing I'm doing when I'm holding that snake, I'm not even thinking about what I'm saying. I'm on autopilot. I've said this stuff so many times, I can just rattle off the information without even thinking about it. The only thing I'm actually coherently thinking about, actively paying attention to, is where the snake's head is and the position of its body behind the head and how close I am to it. I'm constantly judging the strike range of this snake. And as long as you're outside of the strike range, it does not matter how bad the copperhead wants to bite you. It physically can't do it, okay? It's kind of like if you are a master of martial arts, jiu-jitsu, taekwondo, whatever it should be. When you are mastering those skills, what you do, basically what you're doing, is you're learning how the human body works. You're learning the mechanics of the human body. You're learning the arm can bend this way, but it can't bend that way, okay? And my body can do this, and if I do this, then his body can't do that. That's all handling venomous snakes is knowing this species of snake can physically do this, and it physically can't do this. Now, this is something you can't just tell somebody. This comes with handling and experience and maybe a little bit of luck, okay? But over 40 years of doing this, I've kind of gotten to the point where I can look at a certain species of snake, and based on the species and based on the size of the snake, I can make a mental judgment that I better be right about, but I can make a mental judgment on how far this snake can strike. For instance, if you're right here and I put my fist out like this, my arm is extended, well, you can get pretty close to my fist and I can't punch you from this position, okay? But if my fist is drawn back here, it's near my body, and you're right about here, Well, my arm is in a position where I can extend this arm and I can punch. Same thing with a snake. I'm not just looking at where the snake's head is. I'm looking at where the snake's head is and his body position behind his head. That's how I'm judging the strike range of these snakes in order to keep myself from getting bit. Okay, let's go into the chat right here. We're going to talk more about venom, because what happens if a snake bites itself? What happens if there's a copperhead and the copperhead bites itself? We're going to talk about that. And I think it's very interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Let's see here. We got Chocolate Cookies has joined us. Chris Taylor is here. Majestic Butterfly. Majestic Butterfly, where are you from? I don't know if I've seen where you're from before. So tell me where you're from. Let's see. Where, who else we got here? Candy's Critters is back. Thank you for being here, Candy's Critters. Boo Boo Bang Bang. I think you chose that username just so I have to say it on air. He says, answering my kids' questions about what these words mean. Making my dad's job hard tonight, Jason. Sorry about that, Boo Boo Bang Bang. But you got your work cut out for you. Okay, so do copperheads have dry bites? Ask Majestic Butterfly wants to know. Yes, they absolutely do. All snakes, all venomous snakes can have dry bites. So a snake, when it bites and it plunges its fangs into its prey, it also has to decide to inject venom. A snake can easily bite and decide not to inject venom. They can definitely do that. So, all right, let's get back to this because there's some pretty cool stuff in both of these books that I want to go over that I think is really cool. So we talked about delayed fertilization in copperheads, and y'all's homework is to figure out how long a copperhead can delay fertilization. I think they can do it for up to 7 years. This book says 1 year, but I think there's new data that says 7 years. Now, we talked about how big a cottonmouth can be, okay? How big a cottonmouth can be. Now, how big can a copperhead be? I got a call 2 days ago. I think it was 2 days ago. I wish I had this picture to pull up, and maybe I'll put it on the screen later. I don't know if I can show you this or not, but anyway, I got called out to a property where someone had seen a gray diamondback. A gray diamondback. That's what they called it. We got a gray diamondback out here. I said, well, I don't know what a gray diamondback is. I know what an eastern diamondback is. I know what a gray rat snake is, okay? And where you live, neither one of those do, all right? I said, so send me a picture of what you got. They sent me a picture of a run-of-the-mill copperhead. It's a regular old copperhead that they said that their lawn guy identified as a gray diamondback because he knows the snakes. So he made up a snake. Anyway, so I'm like, okay, I can be there in 15 minutes. Do you see the snake? Yeah, he's right here. He's in the well house. Snake's sitting right here. I said, okay, I'll be there in 15 minutes. I'll remove the snake from your well house. Well, I get there. I walk to the well house. Snake is gone. I move this tarp. I move all this stuff out of the way and some insulation laying on the ground, and there's no snake. Now, surrounding this well house is extremely thick ivy. Extremely thick ivy. I always say ivy equals copperheads, okay? Now, the woman who's called me out here tells me that her and the lawn guy saw the snake and that they estimated this copperhead to be in the neighborhood of about 8 feet long and as big around as bigger than your forearm, a massive snake, about 8 feet long. I said, well, ma'am, copperheads can't get 8 feet long. She said, well, this one was. I said, well, luckily we have the picture here, okay? So I got the picture that she sent me. I matched up where it was on the ground. I showed her how wide this little part was in the picture, and it matched how wide the snake was, and showed her this snake could not have been more than 2.5 feet long. They got 8 feet. How do you get 8 feet from a 2.5 foot snake? I have no idea. That's what's called ophidiophobia, extreme fear of snakes. And you'll see things that are not there. So what is the world record, the longest copperhead ever recorded in history? What do y'all think it is? Now, I have people tell me all the time that they'll have copperheads that are 8 foot long, like this one. More commonly, I'll hear that they're 6 foot long, a 6 foot long massive copperhead. And I always say, if you find a 6 foot copperhead, that's not a copperhead. They don't get that big. So the longest copperhead ever recorded, as of right now, was 4 feet 4 inches. 52 inches. 4 feet 4 inches. I've done this for 40 years. The biggest copperhead I personally have ever seen in my entire life. And I was like, man, this is a massive copperhead. This thing is huge. That snake, it was dead. It was in the road. It was run over. I hated that it was run over. But it was so big, I had to stop and move it out of the road. And I said, man, this is the biggest copperhead I've ever seen. I got to measure this thing. I measured the copperhead, and it was 44 inches long, 44 inches, which is way beneath the maximum of 52 inches. So 4 feet 4 inches would be a massive copperhead. But people see snakes, and they very greatly misinterpret the length of these snakes. Even people who have pet snakes. I have people all the time call me and say, hey, we got a pet snake. Can you take it? I had a lady call me years ago to get a python out of her house. They had raised it up. It had gotten so big, it was outgrowing the enclosure. They've had this thing for 10, 15 years, and it's a massive Burmese python. And I said, well, how big is this thing? She said, the snake is 22 feet long. I said, 22 feet long. How do you know this? She said, we measured it. We used a tape measure, and we measured it. It's 22 feet long. Now, when somebody tells me that they've measured the snake with a tape measure, you're like, okay, well, maybe they know what they're talking about, but a 22-foot Burmese python? Come on, man. I can't wait to get to your house and see the snake. As soon as I walk in, I see the snake, and I know this is a big snake. As soon as I see it, I know this is a big snake. It was not 22 foot. I knew that. I knew it wasn't 22 foot. It was well fed. It was fat. I've seen a longer than this one. And I said, man, there's no way that snake is 22 feet. You say you measured it. She said, yeah, look. And she points up at her ceiling, and around the ceiling, they have taken where the snake has shed its skin, and they got one full shed, and they have tacked it up on the wall along the ceiling. It goes around this wall and around this wall, and that's what they measured. They measured this stretched snake shed and came up with 22 feet. Now, here's what I did. I said, give me your tape measure. I got the snake out and measured the snake, and it was no more than 11 feet. It's a big, 11 foot's a big snake. Do they get bigger than that? Of course they do. But she got a 22-foot snake out of an 11-foot snake and said they measured it, okay? So I don't always trust some of these people tell me about snakes. All right, let's keep going because we're going to get to venom in just a minute. Now, one more thing right here about not only can copperheads delay when they give birth, okay? Here's something else. A captive female from Texas gave birth to 5 healthy young snakes, okay? Nothing unusual about that. A year later, she gave birth again to 5 healthy young snakes. What's wrong with this? Well, during all this time, the mother was kept at a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania zoo. This snake was caught in Texas and is kept at the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania zoo. and was never in contact with any male snakes. Okay. So they figured the snake was bred in the wild by a male in Texas. Then it was caught while it was pregnant, brought to the zoo, gives birth to 5 babies. A year later, it's still storing some of that sperm, and then again has 5 more babies. But that's not even the weird part. Some of these babies had different fathers. So they can store it from several different males, and they may have 5 babies, and that one litter may have 5 different fathers, which is pretty incredible. And so what, from an evolutionary standpoint, a survival standpoint, that kind of ensures genetic diversity, which is a pretty cool thing. Okay. So let's get back to this book, because I want to get over here to the venom and what happens when a copperhead bites itself. Now, this also talks about where copperheads live as far as their home range, which I think is pretty interesting. And I want to go back and mention about the snake in the well house, the 8-foot copperhead she said she saw in her well house, to explain this. Now, on average, a female copperhead will have a home range of about 8 acres, okay? And a male copperhead will have a home range a little bit larger of, give or take, 12 acres or so. So let's say an average of 10 acres, okay? Now, that copperhead will live its entire life in those 10 acres. That's where it lives its entire life. How long is a copperhead's entire life? The longest lived copperhead ever on record in captivity was a little over 29 years. Could they live longer? Possibly. But the longest one we know of was 29-year-old copperhead. So imagine you've got a yard of 2 acres. You live in a neighborhood. Copperheads are common in neighborhoods. And 2 acres is not big enough. They're going to occupy 10 acres. 5 different neighbors' homes, yards are occupied by this copperhead. Now, these copperheads' home ranges all overlap each other. They're not pushing other copperheads out. They're not defending their territory. All their home ranges are overlapping each other, okay? So for the 20 years or more that this copperhead's alive, that's where the snake lives. That's its neighborhood. It doesn't want to go anywhere else. That's where it lives. Can it go somewhere else? Of course it can. Do they? Not really. They stay right there. That's why we can't relocate adult copperheads outside of where they've established their range with a lot of success. They can survive if you relocate them, but most of them probably won't, okay? So I was explaining to this lady who had this copperhead in her well house, and her well house is surrounded by extremely thick ivy. And she really wanted me to dig through all this ivy and find this copperhead. And I told her, I said, well, man, this ivy is so thick. There's no way. I mean, you talk about finding a needle in a haystack. What if the needle can move away from you as you're looking for it? That's what we're talking about here, okay? I said, man, listen, let me just tell you something. You don't have a copperhead in this ivy. I'd be shocked if you don't have a bunch of copperheads in this ivy. But I knew that if I caught the copperhead she saw, she'd be happy. She would have been happy with that because sight unseen, she doesn't see the copperheads that are there. She's not worried about them. She's worried about the ones she sees. So all these copperheads that are living on her property, there's probably a lot of them. Their number one job is to never be seen by you. Copperheads rely heavily on camouflage. If you find a copperhead out somewhere, 2 things have happened. The copperhead has made a mistake and you got lucky, okay? Copperheads don't want to ever be seen by you. So if I remove this copperhead, like I said, she'll feel better that copperhead's gone. But is it really doing anything? No, not really. Because all the other copperheads that are living in this perfect environment she's created with planting all this ivy, they're thriving. So removing this one copperhead, all it does is give her a false sense of security that, okay, I'm safe now, okay? What does really need to happen? I explained to her, you got to get rid of the ivy. Well, ivy, English ivy here in the U.S. is invasive anyway. It's not a good thing to have. You shouldn't buy it. You shouldn't plant it. And if you have it, you should kill it unless you like copperheads in your yard. And so she didn't sound like she was on board to kill the English ivy. She just wanted to get rid of the one copperhead that she knew about in her yard. Okay, so let's keep going through this. Now, I think toward the back of this is where it talks about bites. You know, we talked about cottonmouths on the last episode, and this is what I always think is interesting, is depending on where you go, learning what people call certain snakes. And there's a lot of names that are applied to the copperhead, some that I have never heard of before. One is called the beech leaf snake, the beech, B-E-E-C-H, beech leaf snake, the chunkhead, the copper adder, the copper bell snake, the copper belly snake, copperhead moccasin, copperhead viper, the copper snake. I'm not going to read all these. A ton of them. Deaf adder, deaf snake, death adder. Some people call it the dumb rattlesnake or the dumb snake. I never heard this. There's a dumb snake over here. Well, that's one of the names for copperhead, dumb snake. Harlequin snake, hazelhead, Highland moccasin. I've heard of Highland moccasin. You know, we talked about cottonmouths last week, and copperheads, if you remember, Achistrodon piscivorus, Achistrodon leucostoma, Achistrodon cananti. Those are the three cottonmouths, okay? And Achistrodon is the same genus as the eastern copperhead, Achistrodon contortrix, and the broad-banded copperhead, which is Achistrodon contortrix laticinctus. I don't ever see that name. Laticinctus, okay? So what does this mean? It means you can take a copperhead and a cottonmouth and you can breed them together and get a cottonhead. We have a video on our YouTube channel called Copperheads versus Cottonmouths. We explain all the differences and how different these snakes are. Then the second half of the video, we explain how similar these snakes are. At the end of that video, we show you a cottonhead. That's never been documented to happen in the wild. I would expect it probably does happen because there have been videos of a male copperhead and a male cottonmouth in a combat over a nearby female. I don't know if that female was a copperhead or cottonmouth. If it was the opposite, then they could breed and have some babies. And the weird thing is those cottonheads, if they are born, they're not sterile. They can breed. But it's not having a new species of snake created here. Because if you have what's called F1, that first generation of babies, that F1 generation of that copperhead cottonmouth hybrid, the cottonhead, you can look at that snake and you can tell, yeah, I see a little bit of copperhead in it. I see some cottonmouth in it. Now, if you take that baby and you breed it to another cottonhead or to a copperhead or to a cottonmouth, and you get your next generation, you can still see a little bit of both. Once you hit your third generation, guess what we start seeing? It kind of goes back to one or the other. We kind of lose both characteristics and start seeing much more copperhead or much more cottonmouth, and eventually it kind of breeds itself out. So you're not creating a whole new race of snake here, okay? But I think it is pretty cool. Now, did anybody put in the chat if anybody has been bitten by copperheads? Boo Boo Bang Bang says, fishermen have the same problem estimating accurate lengths. No crappie exists less than 10 inches. Exactly. And the other thing, when you're catching a fish, what do? You long arm it. The further you hold it from you toward the camera, the bigger that fish looks. Same thing with snakes. If you put somebody kills a snake, puts it on a stick, the longer the stick, the bigger the snake looks, okay? Dennis Atkins says cotton-headed ninny muggins. Yeah, that's what I always think about when I say cottonhead. So he asked, can we make a cotton-headed rattle moccasin? Now, some people may say that's a stupid question to ask. However, there is a picture, and you can go find it, go look it up. There's a picture of a snake. I don't know what it is, but here's what they say it is. They say it is a cross between a timber rattlesnake and a copperhead. And I do have to admit, when I look at the snake, like looking at a cottonhead, I can see attributes of a copperhead and cottonmouth. When I look at whatever they say this thing is, I can see attributes of a timber rattlesnake and a copperhead. Now, this is not a new photo. It wasn't generated with AI. This photo has been around for many years. I saw it many years ago. And, man, I don't understand if that is, I don't think it's possible. I've always thought it's not possible. But they got dire wolves now. They're talking about bringing back a woolly mammoth. And bring back a woolly mammoth? You tell me a copperhead can't bring the timber rattlesnake? Come on. I don't know. But the picture sure does look like that. Okay. So Anthony asked, I have 2 dogs in a fenced backyard in Oklahoma. I know I have a lot around. Do they stay away from predators like a dog? I've seen gardens and bull snakes, garter snakes and bull snakes in my garden. Would copperheads be there? Yeah. Copperheads don't look at dogs as anything, oh my gosh, you got a dog, let's not go in this yard. That's not what we see at all. Same thing for rattlesnakes. There's a video on my YouTube channel of me removing a 4 foot, 4.5, 5 foot, a big timber rattlesnake from underneath a dog house right at the family's. There's a spider coming down. You see this? Look. Did y'all see that spider? It was just coming down from a web right in front of my camera. Here, fella. Oh, get over there. That was interesting. Luckily, I'm not afraid of spiders. Okay. He was just coming down on the web right in front of my camera. I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but that was crazy. What was I even saying? So anyway, yes, a copperhead's not afraid of dogs. I heard somebody just today say, if you don't want copperheads in your yard, get a cat. The snakes will go away from a cat, and the cat will kill the snakes. Well, you know what we see all the time? At least I do. I get calls all the time, but hey, my cat just got bit by a copperhead. Is going to be okay. Sometimes cats are killed by snakes. Sometimes snakes kill cats. Now, I will say that cats do seem to do a little better with snake envenomations than dogs do. Okay? That doesn't mean that a cat survives them, because a cat's much smaller than a dog, so a bigger body weight, a bigger dog may do better than a cat. But, a same size dog as a cat gets the same amount of venom from a copperhead. The cat will probably do a little better than the dog does. But cats don't keep snakes away. Snakes are not scared of cats. They're not scared of dogs. I've been to several calls where I've had to remove copperheads as well as rattlesnakes out of dog kennels where dogs are in there, and they're scared the dog's going to get bit before I can even get over there to it. I mean, so we get that all the time. So I don't see that happening at all. Okay, Ben Baker says, yes, we could see it. I got to go back and watch this video of that spy. I mean, this whole studio, he could have come down anywhere. He comes down right in front of the camera. That was perfect. Thank you, Spider, for doing that. I'm not even going to kill you. I'm going to let you live in here just for that. Okay. Now, perfect illustration. 10-inch spider grabbed by Jason's 18-inch fist. Okay. That spider wanted to be on the webcast. Yes, he did. That spider is famous now. Okay, let's get on into this. This is some more cool stuff in here. I want to get to the venom. Okay, here's the part talking about venom. The primary function of venom, we know, for any snake is not defense. Defense, they use it secondarily for defense. The primary function of venom is to cause rapid death to their prey. And for copperheads, this is usually small animals. Now, it's not used, or can it cause rapid death in humans or other natural enemies? So the natural enemies of copperheads, what is a natural enemy of a copperhead? A coyote, a fox, a hawk, lots of things. their venom does not cause rapid death to their natural enemies. It doesn't do it. It doesn't mean they couldn't kill a hawk or a fox, possibly, but it doesn't cause rapid death. Their venom causes rapid death only to their prey items. So venom is not primarily for defense. Venom is primarily to secure their food. Now, besides the toxic components in snake venom, there are also relatively non-toxic substances in venom which don't hurt us at all, but what these enzymes do that are not dangerous to us, it promotes rapid spreading of the venom through the victim's body. So when this snake bites and injects this cocktail of venom, part of the venom are harmless enzymes that make the dangerous parts of venom spread throughout your body. So there's a lot of components in venom. There's a lot of things, a lot of different things that venom does. Now, respiratory difficulty is an expression of the neurotoxic effect of venom. And this is most pronounced in cases of envenomations from copperheads, timber rattlesnakes, and western diamondbacks, according to this. Now, this is a really old study, so there may be some updated information on that. But, and I've known, timber rattlesnake venom is being studied right now, especially timber rattlesnakes from the Georgia-Florida line, that area, for the canebrake toxin, as they call it, because the rattlesnakes there have a really high level of neurotoxins as well as hemotoxins in their venom. And it's a little bit different bite than getting bit by a snake in Pennsylvania than a rattlesnake in South Georgia, okay? And so those snakes have that neurotoxic effect, which can cause difficulty breathing. It says copperheads can do that too. Serious secondary infections seldom occur after copperhead bites. So you get bit by copperhead, and you're very rarely going to have an infection. That's what this says, and this is what I say all the time. Some things will say that snakes' mouths are septic and just full of bacteria that can cause a lot of problems, but that's not what we see happening with people who get bit by snakes and they go to the ER. We're not seeing these massive infections and stuff. Could it happen? Of course it could, but it's pretty rare, at least from what I see and what I'm being told. Now, a large adult. Okay, this is interesting. This is something I get this question all the time. Here, before I read it, let me tell you. Here's the question: if you're gonna get bit by a snake, and you're gonna get bit by a copperhead, because we're talking about copperheads, you're gonna get bit by a copperhead, and you want to figure out which copperhead will be worse to get bit by, the adult copperhead or the baby copperhead. Which one, if you had to get bit, would you choose? Would you choose the big old mama snake or the little bitty baby snake? Well, when I pose this question at my talks all the time, some people raised their hand and said, give me the baby snake. But most of the hands, 90% of the hands or more, go up and say, give me the mama snake, because the babies can't control how much venom they inject. And I say to that, most of what the general public is taught about snakes is completely false. The minute this snake is born, guess what it can do? It can very accurately control exactly how much venom it injects. We're told they can't, but it's not true. The babies can control their venom. Now, with that in mind, listen to this. This is pretty cool. This says a large adult male copperhead. The reason we're talking about the male copperhead is because in copperhead specifically, the males get larger than the females. That's generally true for rattlesnakes, but not all rattlesnakes. Some rattlesnake species, the female is bigger, but most rattlesnakes, the male is bigger. Now, the copperhead, the male's bigger, and a large adult male copperhead, its body size may be 30 times larger than a little baby copperhead. So a large male is 30 times larger than a newborn copperhead, okay? And their venom yield is how much venom a snake puts out, okay? The venom yield is proportional to their weight. What does that mean? It means the more a snake weighs, the more venom it gives you. It means the less a snake weighs, the less venom it gives you. So which one's worse to get bit by? Well, the bigger the snake, the bigger the fangs. The bigger the fangs, the bigger the venom glands. The bigger the venom glands, the bigger the hospital bill is going to be, okay? So, bigger the snake, usually the worse the bite. Of course, if you get bit by an adult snake, it gives you a dry bite, and a baby gives you venom. Of course, that bite's going to be worse. But generally speaking, the bigger the snake, the worse the bite, okay? Now, here's something else that's cool, and that's not even the cool. I want to talk about what happens if a copperhead bites itself, because this is what I found interesting. In delivering an effective bite, specifically copperheads, they found out, typically inject somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 75% of the contents of its venom glands. So an adult copperhead can bite you. If it injects venom, it may only be 25% of what it's got. Or if it's really upset, you've been poking it with a stick, it may give you 75% of what it's got. Now, so this was a study. So this scientist, okay, he's studying the effects of copperhead venom. Here's what he figured out. If he milks a snake and he freeze dries the venom, that dried venom, okay, how much of that venom does it take to kill a pigeon? So let's keep all the pigeons the same size. Each pigeon is going to weigh 350 grams. He's got a whole bunch of pigeons. They're all 350 grams. So he injects a pigeon with venom of varying doses, and he figures out, here's how much copperhead venom it takes to kill it. It takes 0.12 milligrams of venom, 0.12 milligrams, that's a very small amount, to kill a 350-gram pigeon. Based on how much venom an adult copperhead yields when it bites, which they say on average is 50 milligrams, as much as 56 milligrams. If you do the math on that, what does that mean? It means that an average adult copperhead would have sufficient venom to kill 470 pigeons, okay? 470 pigeons is how many pigeons one copperhead has enough venom to kill. All right. Why do you need to? If anybody, listen, if you ever go to a sports bar and you're doing trivia night, and then again the question comes up, which it very well could. If you were a copperhead and you're going to bite a pigeon that weighs 350 milligrams, how much venom, how many pigeons could you kill with your venom? Well, you're going to know 470 of them, okay? 470 pigeons. Now, this other scientist, oh, Lord, people think I'm crazy because of what I do. Listen to this. I didn't even want to say his name. I don't even want to embarrass this guy. This scientist, this herpetologist, he is studying copperhead bites. So he gets a newborn copperhead, and he lets the copperhead bite his forearm. And he allows the copperhead to bite and hang on to his forearm. He times it for 60 seconds. For 60 seconds. Then he's like, okay, he pulls the snake off. Here's what he said. Oh, symptoms were relatively severe. You think? Swelling steadily increased for 21 hours. And subsequently did not lessen for the next 12 hours, but gradually subsided after the 7th day after the bite. Then he goes on to say, for further experimentation, I decided to use mice. Yeah, you idiot. You should have used mice to begin with, not your forearm. Anyway, okay. So here's what I want to know. If a copperhead bites himself, if you've been talking and you bite your tongue You ever bit your tongue? How bad that hurts? What if a snake is talking and he bites his tongue? It's going to be pretty bad for him, right? All right, so here we go. Copperheads curiously proved to be more susceptible to venom of their own species than to other snake venom. What these scientists did is they took a few different snakes. Which ones did they take? Okay, here's what they did. They took a timber rattlesnake and a Massasauga rattlesnake, and they had the Massasauga and a timber rattlesnake independently bite other copperheads. And the copperheads did better getting bit by a timber rattlesnake than they did getting bit by another copperhead. I would have never guessed that in my life. Because copperheads have timber rattlesnakes, man, they have some bad venom. Good Lord. But the copperhead did better getting bit by a timber rattlesnake than it did by a copperhead. That is interesting. Okay, let's keep going. So then they said, okay, well, copperheads don't do very well getting bit by other copperheads. How well do other snakes do if they get bit by copperheads? So here's what they did. They tested it on several snakes. They injected other snakes with copperhead venoms. The snakes they used were a water moccasin, the cottonmouth we talked about last week, the Massasauga, a timber rattlesnake, a common non-venomous water snake, a yellow-bellied racer, a black rat snake, and the milk snake. Now, the milk snake is interesting. Okay, why is the milk snake interesting? To see what happens here. Because what is a milk snake? A king snake. A milk snake is basically a king snake. What do king snakes eat? Other snakes. Right? And we always talk about how king snakes are mostly immune to venom. Well, is this milk snake? Let's see. All right, so they injected copperhead venom into a water moccasin, Massasauga, timber rattlesnake, common water snake, yellow-bellied racer, black rat snake, and a milk snake. All of them resulted in death. Some of them as soon as 35 minutes. Some of them took 29 hours to die. Some of them died within 45 minutes. Some took 29 hours, but every one of them died. That's interesting. All right. Talking about bites and people, we always tell people copperhead venomous bites from copperheads are not considered deadly, and we don't consider them deadly. Now, this was a study. This was some information taken a long time ago, over 100 years ago, before 1908. They investigated 740 snake bites. Out of the 740 bites they investigated, 97 of those bites were from copperheads. Out of the 97 bites, 5 of the copperhead bites resulted in the person's death. In each instance of death, they said the person would not have died if they had had better care, and if the 3 men who had gotten bit, because I think 2 of them were kids, if the 3 men who got bit, if they hadn't drank so much whiskey, they would have lived. Okay? So you see in all the cowboy movies, the cowboy gets bit by a rattlesnake or whatever he gets bit by, and he starts chugging down whiskey to help him. Well, one thing you don't do, you get bit by a snake. You shouldn't drink alcohol anyway, first of all. Second of all, you get bit by a snake, you don't want to drink alcohol. What does it do? It speeds up your heart. I think it relaxes you. Well, maybe it does, but it speeds up your heart, makes venom flow faster. It's like drinking coffee. So don't drink caffeine, don't drink alcohol, no caffeinated beverages. You don't want to do that. That can make things really bad for you. So anyway, did you guys enjoy learning about copperheads? Because I learned something. I'm just very surprised that copperheads don't do very well getting, not even a copperhead biting another copperhead. A copperhead biting itself doesn't do well. They even found in this study that copperheads, sometimes when they were biting and had their fangs extended, but then closed their mouth quickly, the fangs would protrude to the bottom jaw, and some of the venom got in the lining around their bottom jaw, and they had bad reactions to that. I mean, the snake bit its lip, okay, and had a bad reaction from its own venom, not the venom of another copperhead, their own venom, which is crazy. Anyway, I think that was pretty interesting. So, guys, thank y'all for joining me for episode number 34 of the Snakes Are Us TV podcast. I have enjoyed being here with y'all tonight and have enjoyed talking all about copperheads. So I hope you enjoyed this as much as I do. And I want you to come back next week. We'll be going over, we'll be here for episode number 35. Cannot believe we're going to episode number 35. Can you believe that? I can't believe it. Thank y'all for coming. Whether you agree with this or not, doesn't matter. Whether you believe it or not, doesn't matter. Jesus loves you, and I do. You guys have a great day.